Hey everyone, this is WobblyWallaby. Today I'll go through the PvE tier list for Ragnarok Mobile for the end of August 2024. Whether you're free to play or pay to win, I'll let you know which are the best classes to play for PvE in the current meta. Also great news, I have codes to give away. I have 10 C, 5 global, and 5 EU codes. In the comments section, say who do you think are the S tier classes. Please include your Discord ID and which server you play on, such as C, Global, or EU. The winners will get codes starting September 10th, 2024. Stay tuned for all the details. In the current meta, the top PvE classes need to do well in White Airship, Oracle Dungeon, Ponape Secret Realm, and Legend Isles and Museum. These are the toughest instances in the game, therefore my rankings are highly dependent on how well these classes do there. MVP hunting is important, and basically the best one-hit class deserves the S tier. For DPS, you need to do high damage with high frequency because bosses in Legend Isles and Museums have a damage cap, so dealing damage quickly over time is better, but the damage also needs to be high as well. For Legend instances, DPS classes should also hit ideal stats easily, which means 50% skill damage for skill users, or 50% auto attack damage for auto attack users, 70% penetration for physical users, or 70% magic penetration for magic users. And then you need 200% ignore defense, or 200% ignore magic defense depending on your class. Next, top DPS classes need to do AoE. Single target just isn't good enough for clearing White Airship or Oracle Dungeon mobs. Next, for survivability, it is nice to have for DPS classes. I used to value this much more, but after the release of Klitzberg, she has proved that if you hit hard enough, you can beat the bosses before you run out of anti-death. Also, since last time, Tier 5 Shadow Equipment provided some nice anti-death alternatives, which gives you much more survivability options than before. For example, there's Skeleton Bracer, Tears Armor, and Perseverance Armor. These will often give you an additional anti-death, which will often be just enough with anti-death food to let you take down a boss. However, for support, survivability is an absolute, and it is top tier, as well as useful buffs and debuffs to the party. Debuffing is huge in the current meta, especially in Ponape Secret Realm and White Airship. One of the most common strategies is the Dark Convert strategy, where the priest converts the target to dark and everyone goes holy. Other strategies include the Poison, Burn, and Water conversion. Also, I go into detail in another video that magic classes in general have a bigger disadvantage than physical classes. They can do well, but they just require much more investment into gear compared to physical classes. This is why in general I recommend physical classes over magic classes, especially for free-to-play players. A link will be in the description if you're interested. Next, here are the different tiers defined. S tier is unfair advantage, high damage or must-have support. A tier is very strong, but not as good as S tier. I'd highly recommend this if you don't have the requirements for S tier classes. Next is B tier. These are good classes but lack advantages over S or A tier classes. I'd recommend this if you like the class's designs and maybe prefer to play for fun or for memes. Next is C tier. I would not recommend this class. And finally is D tier, which is trash level, and I hope the devs will buff classes here. I did want to keep the S tier as small as possible this time, so I did move a lot of classes that used to be S tier into A tier. Otherwise, if there's so many S tier classes, then it kinda loses its purpose. It should be exclusive to just the best classes in the game. Next, let's start off with D tier. First is Hela, who is made for PvP, is not useful for PvE, and if you like summons, Begetter is significantly better. Next is Phantom Dancer. It has low DPS and requires high deposit and good equipment to be usable. It's also not very useful for PvE. Next is Blade Soul. It also has low DPS and not very useful for PvE. Poisonous Smoke used to be nice for dealing with mobs, but other classes have better AoE now. Next is Dragon Fist. Used to be one of the most feared one-hit masters, but due to the HP cap on bosses and instances and being stuck to neutral water, other boss hunting classes are much better. Next is Tyrant. It has low DPS and is more for farming and PvP. Next is C tier. Versus Thanatos, it has low damage frequency. It does have potential, but it needs to hit much faster. I think going to the next phases just takes too long. Next is Nidhogg. Her max level feathers does shoot dark elemental magic bolts if other attack, but if only this could be made holy. With White Star Airship, other debuffers just have become better support than her. I think she needs some heavy buffs to make her more useful in White Star Airship and other instances. Next is Jormungandr. He does have some use in floor 3 of Museum, but besides that, not ideal for anywhere else. I definitely would choose other magic classes over him for PvE. Next is Chronomancer. I have seen Chronomancer shred single bosses, but still a very meme build, and using other magic classes would be easier, and you definitely want AoE to be useful. Next is Solar Luna. Its DPS is too low, and its support just isn't as good as ones in the B tier or A tier. Next is B tier. First is Helgrihen. He's used for White Star airships on weeks where there is a reinforced affix. Helgrihen can help reduce 20% refined damage reduction due to the destructive hammer. Besides that, he doesn't seem that useful, but since he's almost mandatory for those weeks where there's that affix, that's why he deserves the B tier. Next is Arcane Master, whose notable skills include Water Convert with Frost Misty and having high survivability due to White Barrier. Normally I put Arcane Master lower in the past, but Water Conversion has found its way back in the meta for things like White Star Airship or Pawn and Pay Secret Realm, especially since Thor is so strong now. They make a good team. Next is Spirit Whisperer. It has lots of utility, good damage, but can't compete with A tier classes for support or damage, so that's why I lowered it to B tier. I used to recommend this class for new players, but if you want high survivability and damage, Rathgracy is the better option now. Next is Stella Hunter. It has high DPS but kinda squishy. It is nowhere near Fenrir's damage or burst. People are okay with Fenrir being in a party, but not Stella Hunters unfortunately. Next is Soulbinder. It has great support and also nuke options. After learning about Soulbinder's powerful support from Built to Kill, I do use it in my weekly parties now and it helps a ton. For nuke, there's a bunch of setup, but it is the best magic nuking class in the game. Next is Royomaru or Wataru. I would choose Saitama over this, he just doesn't have a good follow-up after his big burst. I also don't see him being used much in instances besides one-shotting Thanatos Tower Legend, but even then Heinrich and others can do that now too. Next is Lightbringer. It is the best newbie-friendly free-to-play nuke in the game with Pioneer and Machine Revolution. You can't deal with high boards like Heinrich or Saitama, but if you prefer the low board MVP hunt and lack ruins for Heinrich, this is okay. Lightbringer did get buffs to Photon Cannon and Amembanite, but I wouldn't recommend people use that for instances. There are just better classes out there for DPS like Klitzberg or Rathgracy. Next is Slayer. She has decent AoE and DPS, as well as some survivability, but lacks support and buffs. I'd rather play Sarah than Slayer, and buffs would only happen if it got re-released, and that depends on the licensing contracts that ROM has with that anime. Next is A tier. First is Ancient Artifact User. It has high DPS, convertible, but has a slow attack rate. If her attack rate was higher, she'd definitely be S tier. The good thing is she can be used in the current Dark Convert meta, which makes her very strong in instances like White Star Airship. What makes her particularly unfair is the Ancient Artifact hero skill. At level 4, when calculating defense, ignore physical defense and ignore magic defense are added together, and when calculating reductions, physical pierce and magic pierce are added together. This makes her very unfair. Next is Heinrich. He has high DPS but bad survivability. He is good for White Star Airship though. His range is personally kinda bad in my opinion, and I'd rather use Klitzberg. He is the best free-to-play boss hunting class in my opinion, since his burst is insane and it doesn't cost BCC to unlock him like Saitama. For White Star Airship, Bright Mirror is quite amazing. He's able to reduce the enemy's critical damage reduction and all elemental damage reductions by 30%. Next is Rune Master. Despite being able to pull off S tier damage, I find he just has very high equipment requirements. It is significantly easier to gear up classes like Klitzberg or Infernal Armor instead. That is why I'm putting it in A tier. Sink or Swim is the reason why this is very strong, since it's able to convert magic defense into magic attack and boost damage like crazy, but it will take a lot of patience for your Rune Master to fully reach his potential. Next is Apocalypse. It's one of the best for clearing floor 3 Museum due to converting to Ghost, but it lacks survivability and the range is low, making it not ideal for other instances. With the exception of floor 3 Museum, I personally wouldn't ever choose Apocalypse over Callisburg or Rathkrasi, who definitely see more play than him in many other instances as well. Next is Divine Avenger. He's super useful for White Star Airship and floor 3 Museum for his taunt, and he can direct damage away from your primary DPS and distract the bosses and mobs. Next is Begetter. The homunculus damage is quite good, but I really don't like the targeting. The physical build is the easiest to build for PvE, but the magic one is also quite strong, but unfortunately you need really good gear for that. This is the best class for summoning and dealing damage, but personally I just don't like how the homunculus acts sometimes. I prefer to have more control over what I'm damaging and targeting. Next is Novice Guardian. It is truly a fall from grace. It used to be one of the best classes in the game. Unfortunately, the high wind resist is still a problem in legend instances. It used to be amazing since they could completely ignore defense, but now it can't compete with the S tier damage dealers like Thor. I do see people using this for boss hunting, and sometimes when using Water Convert this is quite useful as well. Next is Yamada, which is fantastic for White Star Airship support. To help debuff, you need one single Thought Rune with a high first line to greatly reduce the target's damage reduction. And you can also help with the burn build with my Rand Hayakami, which is an excellent way for helping your Ronin teammates out, since it can cause burn and reduce fire attribute damage reduction by 30%. Next is Sarah Allen. She has high DPS, but her primary spammable DPS is fire. She is able to deal with Museum 3F very well, and she can do ghost damage too if needed. I was very tempted to put her into S tier, but I kept her here for two reasons. First, she lacks survivability compared to Genos, and secondly, for the upcoming Magic DPS collab Liu, he absolutely crushes her in terms of damage and survivability. So despite playing her on an amazing account recently, I still think she's among the same levels of the other S tier classes that have currently moved to A tier. She's definitely great, but just not S tier at the moment. However, she is the best non-BCC Magic DPS at the moment. One great thing about her is hitting key stats, especially ignore magic defense. For Wish Chant, she can ignore the enemy physical and magic defense, but there is a cooldown, and also the Anti-Falso Talisman can give up to 35% skill damage at level 7. In the current screenshot, it's at level 4, which is why it's at 20%. Next are S tier classes, starting first with Genos, who has high DPS and frequency, also great AoE and survivability. His attacks are not convertible, but fire and wind work quite well in instances. He is a magic class, so he takes much more work to build since hitting ideal stats just isn't as easy compared to his physical counterparts. He is the best magic DPS in the game in my opinion, but unfortunately this was a limited class and cost a lot of money. His survivability is great due to Demon Cyborg, which is his hero skill, that grants him anti-death. At level 7, if he gets hit less than 9 times in 7 seconds, he'll be back to life and he can also attack as well. This is a great survivability skill and one of the reasons he's worthy of being S tier. Next is Rathkrasi. Rathkrasi has high DPS, high frequency, AoE, convertible, and the best survivability in the game. She's also great at hitting ideal stats, which makes her one of the best classes I recommend to most players. First is Valkyrie, which increases skill damage by 30%, and then there's Blade of Order, where each attack reduces the target's physical defense by 10% for 4 seconds and can be stacked 5 times. This is a great way to get 50% ignore defense. Also, she has the best survivability in the game due to Divine Wing Armor, which basically provides you up to 4 HP shields. Next is Thor, who has high DPS and frequency. He has good damage reductions too. Although he's stuck to wind only, his modifiers are just so crazy high that the damage is still insane. Unfortunately, he was an event limited class, so unless they re-release this, you won't be able to access him again. Next is Fenrir. He has high DPS and frequency, and also has some AoE. Personally, I think he's the best ranged auto attack class in the game. With Tyr's armor Shadow Equipment level 5 giving him anti-death, he has much more survivability now, which I think was his biggest disadvantage before. He has fantastic options for hitting critical stats. He has Frostmoon Arrow, which increases his auto attack damage by 30%. He He can convert, but his water conversion from Frostmoon Arrow does enough damage that you can just stick with it. He also has Twilight Attack, which increases his physical pierce by 30%, and you also get 50% critical damage as well as some extra bonus damage. Also for scalability, when his core hero skill is at level 7, his penetrating arrows deal double damage to monsters, which is truly insane. Also for survivability, you can also do Moonshadow Barb for 1 second of invulnerability, so if you're good at timing, you also get some additional anti-death right here. Next is Klitzberg, who has high DPS, high damage frequency, her attacks are convertible, she does great AoE, but lacks survivability. The damage output for her is so high that it can deal with the lack of survivability. That is, the boss will be dead before your anti-death options are gone. I have many friends who have switched away from Ragnarok or other classes to Klitzberg for her insane damage potential. First, for her hitting her critical stat, she has a few options, versus Blossom Tea, where for every 1% of her penetration, it increases her ignore physical defense by 1%, so it's an easy way to get 200% ignore defense. Next is Flower Desperation, which also increases penetration and skill damage by 30%. Again, since each penetration percentage gives ignore defense, this is another easy 30% ignore defense. Another notable skill is Wish Flower, which I use against the PSR dragon during explosions. It makes me invulnerable to death, so it's kinda like anti-death if you time it properly. This skill also scales with Agi, making it a very powerful skill as well. This is currently my main class as she's too busted and very strong. Next is Saint, which is the best support class in the game and continues to dominate with the Dark Convert meta. Saints have great survivability and lots of very useful buffs and debuffs too. These days, the killer combo is Exhort to convert to Dark, which can be triggered by using auto attack or Magnus Exorcism to trigger it, and then a ratio to increase holy damage taken for the target. In addition, the holy resist can be further decreased with Silent Prayer Ruin. I think from now to the end of time, Saints will be the most vital support class in the game. Next is Infernal Armor, who has high DPS, high frequency, great AoE, and high survivability. He is stuck to Fire and Holy, but that is fine for the Dark Convert meta. His biggest advantage is his damage scaling through Sink or Swim, huge modifier bonuses for his primary attack, and burning targets. People use MDef gear to get a high magic defense, and then they do this before casting Sink or Swim, and then after they switch back to their normal DPS PvE gear such as this. This was my old main class, but I found Klitzberg was just a lot easier to play, and I definitely got tired of doing MDef switching all the time with Yimmers. But Infernal Armor is amazing and is capable of solo carrying White Star Airship as it scales very well with MDef, ruins, and high deposits. For hitting ideal stats, Infernal Armor is great since it increases penetration by 20%, and for survivability, Last Stand gives 8 seconds of invulnerability, which is fantastic. Finally is Saitama, who has high DPS and a follow-up that has high frequency. His attacks are convertible, but he lacks good AoE. He is the best boss hunter in the game and does pretty well with killing Nuka on floor 3 of Museum. His Enforcement of Justice does completely ignore defense, which is great, but his follow-up successive attack does require ignore defense. I put him in S tier due to his boss nuking capabilities, but you won't see him used much in White Star Airship or PSR because he lacks survivability and large AoE. If I do boss hunting, Saitama is definitely my go-to class. Next, here's the overall tier list for end of August of 2024 for Ragnarok Mobile. The 3 classes I most recommend to people who ask are Rathgrissy, Klitzberg, and Saint. Luckily, all 3 of these are attainable without spending BCC. I think Rathgrissy is the best for new players and free-to-play players because it gives you lots of survivability and a bit of damage, but once you get stronger, then maybe try Klitzberg if you want to carry better. Klitzberg's damage is just so much better than Rathgrissy's. And if you want support, then Saint is the best, and you can definitely play Saint even as a free-to-play player. So, what are your thoughts on this tier list? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Here's the video that I recommend, and if you want more tier lists, check out this playlist over here.